We're living in a golden age of conspiracy theories, or a nightmare, depending on your point of view. Scroll through social media and it feels as though the line between fact and claim is disturbingly thin. When David Ambrose and Christopher Mills hatched the idea of a sci-fi story in the form of a fictional documentary, intended as an elaborate April the 1st joke, they come to believe how their idea would take on a life of its own for decades to come. Welcome to Very British Futures, a podcast about the science fiction television produced in the UK. Today we're looking at a one-off drama which was shown once in 1977 on ITV, caused a brief stir in the news and then faded from viewers' memories. Except it didn't. Alternative 3 became a book and part of a genuine conspiracy theory that has resulted in at least 2 more 21st century documentaries and numerous online message boards. Taking a closer look at the original production with me and trying not to become embroiled in an international cover-up is writer, comedian, actor and presenter Toby Haydock.
Well, you say that, but that could just be the cover that we need to propagate our true conspiracy theory. This could all be a ruse, Gareth. This could all be our way of sending signals out to only those who are too clever to understand the secrets that we'll be imparting through subtext and imagery.
Yes, if you do find anything when you play this backwards, let me know. I'd love to know.
Absolutely.
Writer David Ambrose had been toying with a TV play about people who left their lives and families and vanished without explanation. He was introduced to director Christopher Milne, and together they noticed the recent Mars photos from NASA's Viking probe on the cover of the latest edition of Paris Match. This gave them the idea of a secret Mars colony. Alternative 3 was originally planned by Anglia TV to be broadcast on the 1st of April 1977 as a hoax in the style of Panorama's famous Spaghetti Harvest item. Unfortunately, industrial action at ITV meant that a nationwide slot was not available on that date, and it was not broadcast until the 20th of June. The hoax caused a few complaints and a flutter of interest in newspapers at the time. It was sold to several countries and was particularly popular in Japan, where it was broadcast annually for a decade. The following is going to contain spoilers. On the 20th of June 1977, host Tim Brinton introduces the latest episode of science magazine Science Report by explaining that this is not the documentary the team had intended to make. Their investigation into a brain drain of young scientists leaving the UK had instead revealed that a significant minority of these scientists and other professionals had disappeared without trace. They cover the case of Jodrell Bank astronomer Professor Ballantyne, who sent a videotape to a newspaper editor friend before dying in an unexplained car accident. The tape appears to show static. Severe weather is increasing around the planet, leading to an international government conference about tackling the greenhouse effect. A physicist called Dr. Gernstein suggests that it is already too late to stop dangerous climate change and makes allusions to a third alternative. Harry, a young American, gets in touch, claiming to know the incredible truth behind the disappearances. But when they return to him, he is violent and paranoid. Yet his evidence leads them to troubled Apollo astronaut Bob Grodin. He appears in radio recordings, apparently witnessing other people and spacecraft on the moon. He claims that the Apollo program was merely propaganda, covering up a much bigger mission. Tim Brinton presents their theory of a secret Mars colony, set up as a way for a small elite to escape the now certain destruction of human life on Earth. Thanks to Harry's girlfriend, the journalists lay their hands on an electronic decoder and discover the mysterious videotape contains a recording from an American-Soviet unmanned probe landing on Mars and filming a life form moving beneath the soil. Start off with my usual first question, which is, prior to me getting in touch and asking if you would do this podcast, had you heard of Alternative 3?
Well, I thought I hadn't, and then when I thought of it, I think I heard of it, but I wasn't across it at all. And I think when you first mentioned it, I thought, oh, do I know that? And then when you described it to me and said it, I was like, okay, it's this, yes. But I have to admit, it's the odd thing, isn't it? When you think of yourself as being across sort of archive TV, because the famous ones we all get to know because somebody talks about them or whatever. But this one had pretty much I'd not managed to avail myself of it. So I was delighted when you suggested it and then enabled me to get hold of it, because it all adds to that great TV landscape that we've all got gaps. I mean, I know some people who haven't watched Quatermass or The Prisoner. I think, what, my goodness. So I'll confess to not having seen it, but also I think that's allowed. But now I'm very glad that I have.
Well, that leads nicely into the next question. I'll just add, it was something that was, I hadn't really heard about it until I read the Encyclopedia of Science Fiction. It was always kind of, oh, that sounded interesting. And then I read about it again in the marvelous Scarred for Life, Volume 1.
Yes, of course.
And that made me much more determined to track it down, because it sounded right up my street.
Yeah.
So what was your overall impression of it?
I really enjoyed it. I mean, I was fascinated by the fact that it had and continues to have the impact that it had. Because, of course, I totally understand it having the impact that it had at the time, because, people weren't quite so across how media worked, etc. Even though it's got a cast list at the end, I mean, it does, even though it presents itself as a documentary. And obviously, Tim Brinton was associated with news and factual, and he does that style very well. Although I do think in places is it because of the way that it was done, or is it because of the way that such reportage was done that on occasion it looks slightly spoofy, slightly Garth Marenghi or whatever? But if that's just through our modern lens, that it would have looked like that. Even a real documentary would look a little bit like that, with the fact that you'll cut away from the studio to the side of the River Thames for no reason, and then the presenter will continue his thought or whatever. But that's fine. That's not to criticize it. It's more how I was trying to see how absolutely real it would have looked at the time, and the film stock helps, and all of that side of things, and the fact that a lot of drama at the time was made as a mixture of film and videotape, but documentaries like this would have been 100%. Even though this was a drama, it was made as a documentary and it uses the right film stock, and anything that purports to be real is always very interesting. And I was impressed with the impression it clearly made at the time, and a lot of people clearly took it at face value, and I can see why. Even though, if you're like you and me, you can go, well, that's Shane Rimmer. So he's, he wasn't an astronaut. That's. I mean, he was an astronaut. He was a Thunderbird, but it's so if you're an actor spotter. Even though the presenter is the genuine article, we can pick. But again, you wouldn't expect the audience at the time to do that. And I thought it was a great wheeze. Does it spread the premise once you get the joke? Because it can't have a plot, of course, because it's a it's speculative, but I think it rounds itself out enough, and it's not just doing the same thing, because you have the people who are going missing, so they go looking for the people, and then they track down the footage, so it does develop. It's not a one note thing. So and considering how much television and how many sort of single plays were, all done in the same kind of way, I'm all for it. I thought it was great fun. Yeah.
Great. Yes, I was pretty impressed. I know what you mean about the style of it. There are moments it threatens to slip into kind of Ethel the Frog sort of territory.
Yeah, it reminds me. Do you remember when Mark Gatiss did a Man Alive spoof on the Green Death, Doctor Who, the Green Death DVD? It was a bit like that. It was, you could see it being done not too dissimilarly in a spoofy way. But again, I think I get a bit paranoid about that, because I imagine somebody who isn't sympathetic to such stuff going, I actually thought on its own terms it worked really nicely.
And it helps that a lot of documentaries do have a kind of narrative style. I mean, a lot of TV documentaries start off with a hook of some kind,
of course, yeah,
an intriguing question, and then they develop it and they come round to explain it. So I think that helps, that it's makes it more believable.
Yeah, and they address head on some of the potential problems within the narrative that they need to weave, and the methodology of the pretend documentary. So they'll, when they film the meeting with the scientist, they sort of go, now, we wouldn't under normal circumstances film like this, but you'll see why we've done it, which of course, and they wouldn't normally have done that. And of course that guy would have had to have been mic'd up, really, and all those sorts of things. But that they address it just enough to go, we're aware that this is, that we're on slightly rocky ground occasionally, adhering to this documentary thing, but we have to do it in order to tell the story in this way. And I think they earn your faith in that regard, because they're not glib about it. They don't just brush over it. They at least try to draw attention to, well, we're doing it like this on this occasion because. And I think they work quite hard to do that, and deserve our indulgence as a result.
These are not people who are trying to con us. I mean, they put in some deliberately false facts that I think that are reasonably... Someone who knew a bit about the subject would know that Bob Grodin was not an astronaut, for example.
Yes.
Yeah, there's a few little... And of course, as you say, there's a cast list at the end. So
yeah. But we know, though, don't we, that didn't stop people believing it. And actually, that hasn't stopped people still believing it today. That's slightly different. The people that believed it at the time believed it was a genuine program. The people that believe it now believe that the program makers know something that the general population don't know, and they smuggled it in, and were telling the truth to power through the medium, even though those program makers said, no, we weren't, we were just making a thing. But you would say that. Which means I have a slightly uneasy relationship with it, because I admire its chutzpah and the fact that it taps into those primal theories and primal fears, and I love a conspiracy theory sort of X-Files type of thick drama. But if it gives people an excuse to indulge in them in real life, I'm slightly less welcoming of them, because I've had dear friends disappear down conspiracy rabbit holes, and I don't think it's particularly helpful, and it certainly doesn't help a lot of modern internet discourse where people allow for the daftest of things, and would cite things like this as evidence.
Part of my preparation for doing this, I watched another documentary that's available on Amazon called Alternative Free: The Secret Mars Colony. Basically telling the same story, but as you say, they're taking it a bit more seriously. And they do that thing of, there was this documentary in Britain, even though it wasn't real, some of these facts are real that they were reporting. So that is, yes, a little concerning.
Yes, but the program makers can't be held responsible for that, as you say, because they the closing cap, because its broadcast date was delayed, wasn't it? It was supposed to be on April the 1st, and the first caption on the credit says April the 1st, and so it's drawing attention to itself fairly starkly. But yes, of course, that's how the great conspiracy theorist mind works, is to say, even if somebody says no, this is not remotely true, they go, yeah, but that's what they would say. And you can't argue with that.
Very true that. One interesting I think is that in a lot of the internet articles on this film say that it was shown as part of an actual angular TV series called Science Report. I have to say, I've been looking into this and I can't find any evidence that there ever was such a program as
No,
Science
so
Report.
Science Report. So the fake documentary is within a fake magazine strand or science strand. So yes, they've created the format of a show. They've presented it as if it were a real thing, and they've used a real. But Tim Bridget, he wasn't. He'd been in news, hadn't he? And then he became an MP. But he was only allowed to do that because he wasn't in news anymore. Because the rules then were, if had he been actually a bona fide presenter of a program like that, he wouldn't have been allowed to do it because that would have been seen as deliberate hoodwinking. But because he was he'd fallen between stools because he had done that, and he was a member of Equity because he had acting background, I think, he was able to do it to bring the plausibility to it because he was somebody that they sort of went, well, he could be doing that because we've seen him as presenter, but he wasn't the presenter of Science Report, which was an actual thing. They wouldn't have been allowed to do that, and they didn't do that. He gives it a great air of plausibility, and I think he's rather good. He even if you don't know him, because obviously it's so many years later, I think you look at him and I think you would be unsurprised to learn that he was the genuine article.
He is very good in it. I think he
Yeah.
does. He's very believable. That kind of leads us into what did you think of the performances of the rest of the cast?
I thought they were all great because there's the sort of three anchors, aren't there? There's Gregory Munro, who's the son of Carmen Munro, the actress from Desmond's.
I did not know
Who's
that.
who sadly died rather young. And interestingly, they deliberately wanted an actor of color to have quite a prominent part because this is a time when television's thinking about those sorts of things. So that's another area where I think it's rather laudable. And he's great. I totally buy him as he was an actor. He wasn't a news reporter, but I totally buy him in that role. And he manages to do that thing of straddling the fact that he's got to look like a plausible reporter, but also the fact that as an actor, he's trying to make it sort of dramatic, even though it's purporting to be real. And when the camera's following him and he's looking behind it, and I think he does all of that really well. And then you've got Carol Hazel, who's the other one, who also died really young. She only died 2 years after this. Who's the one who does the reporting for By the Roadside and all that. And I think they all carry that side of things off very, very well. And they're doing different sorts of performances from everybody else, who of course are people that are being sort of dropped in on. And you have the scientist who sort of said, I can't talk to you anymore and things like that. And of course we have a few recognizable faces in it, which again helps to tip us off to the fact that this isn't real, particularly Richard Marner from Allo Allo as the scientist, who was the genuine. He was Russian, wasn't he? So he's the sort of genuine article, and apparently he deliberately didn't really learn his lines as well as he normally would have done to give his delivery a more conversational style, and they do. But do all of that stuff very well. And then you've got Shane Rimmer, who's again doing something slightly different because a lot of it sort of drop in, walk and talk stuff or doorstepping, whereas Shane Rimmer's supplying you with the sort of paranoid, I'm talking to you in secret stuff. And they even treat the film as well with some of that so that it looks like it's stuff that's been shot on old film or scratched film or film that's been, hung on to. And also they convince us that he's in America, even though they're not. So they do a lot of stuff to the film stock and to the presentation of it. And Rimmer is, covered in sweat. And they do that clever thing of they have him on a satellite link first, don't they? And then we see him in person. So that story develops and he gives us the kind of, I'm telling you this, he's the sort of deep throat kind of guy. And Shane Rimmer's, brilliant casting for that because he's the sort of genuine article. Although again, he would have been so. Would he have been so recognized? Again, it's hard for me because I like recognizing actors, but I think I'm not sure my mum wouldn't have gone, oh yeah, I know that guy.
Yeah, I'm not sure the mainstream audience would. I think film fans back in the 70s our equivalents back then, sort of like,
Yeah,
would have said, "Oh yeah, that's Shane Rimmer. I remember him from Diamonds Are Forever or
yeah,
whatever,
yeah.
or
And
Doctor Strangelove."
he's a great actor. He's really good casting for it.
And yeah, he puts a lot into that character. Yeah, I think he does a nice little background. There's a lovely little bit when he's kind of introducing his very young wife, and so sort of
Yes.
he kind of loses track of his words, trying to explain how she's helped him. And I
Yeah.
thought that's a nice little
Yeah.
sort of touch of it. I mean, I mentioned you are an actor yourself. Sort of, have you been in that sort of situation of being naturalistic as a character?
I'm trying to think. Because I've certainly done stuff. I remember doing a pilot of something stuff where, where the wheeze was. It was about, you get them a lot now. It was new at the time, where it purports to be a documentary. So the camera is eavesdropping on you, and you're not sort of hitting marks. And so you do pitch the performance slightly differently. And it was a lot more improvised. And I think such things have to be sort of improvised, and they do, and it does put you in a different mode. And I think it's particularly laudable for something from back then as well, when television was in a much more theatrical tradition as well. And even the very best acted television from that time might jar a little bit to a modern audience because it's studio multi-camera, and everyone is performing to a level that is still influenced by the stage in a way. So I think that's another reason why this was sort of would have been particularly effective, because I think they do pitch it counterintuitively to television acting at that time, and I think they all do a pretty decent job, because as probably there would have been a lot of direction to sort of keep it minimal, perhaps not stick to the script 100%, and just be a bit more realistic. And you can do that if the setup is different. You can get into that mode, and I think they've clearly done that. Yeah.
Yes, it's interesting you say about the footage. Apparently, for that secret filming of Bob Grodin, they had a bit of a struggle getting the film processors to kind of get it to
Yes.
that damaged level, because naturally, as professionals, it kind of
Absolutely.
it went completely against the grain to do
Yeah,
that.
absolutely. Is that, yes, it has to fulfill the technical standards, otherwise we're not doing our job properly. Whereas, of course, if it had looked too pristine, it wouldn't have been as effective.
What do you think of it as the look of it? With saying how it's fairly convincing on the production sort of side.
Yeah, again, I would be interested to see what modern audiences make, because to me it was so evocative of what things looked like at that time.
Mm.
I very quickly, I've mentioned this in other podcasts, so forgive anybody that's heard me droning on before, but it's a thing we do, Gareth. I think is that I early on could tell the difference between film and videotape, to the extent that I could tell the difference in when something was videotaped in a studio and then goes outside, and it's on film. If you mention that to my mother, she hasn't a clue what you're talking about. Some people do not read that stuff in the way that we maybe can. I know at the
Hmm.
time television was very keen to try and avoid that change in texture, because it was a stark change which stopped things from feeling cohesive. But actually, viewing audiences were quite used to it, and of course, not everybody would have been watching in color even then, which would have helped a little bit. But for me, that particular kind of film stock, and I'm used to watching a lot of stuff from that time that's been restored, and I was kind of quite happy that it still had the bit of the flub when a sound reel changes or whatever, and the flicker of the hair in the gate or whatever, and the speckles on there. I found that very reassuringly of its time, because that's how stuff looked and
Hmm.
sounded, and the slight echo of film sound, which is very different to the sound you get on videotape. So for me, that helped with the authenticity of it being a documentary from that time, because the
Hmm.
grain and the stock and the coloring and everything pulled me back immediately to that. But also that meant I found it sort of comfortingly nostalgic as well, because I remember stuff being like that. So I'd be interested to see what a modern somebody born later than I thought of that, and if that helped or hindered what it was, because Because would it look like a spoof even if it wasn't meant to look like a spoof? Would a documentary from that time, a real one,
Mm.
look like a spoof to a modern
Mm.
audience because it has dated so, or would it actually look less like a spoof because they don't have the nostalgia element to it that somebody that was there at the time did. So I'm interested to see. I'd be interested to see how it's worked over that passage of time. But for me, it worked sort of on two different fronts, if you like. I
Mm.
loved the filmic look of it.
Yes, I think it works very well, and of course, it allows them to put in stock footage quite easily from NASA, which
And
is.
seamlessly, absolutely, which wouldn't have looked the same had some of it been on VT.
I mean, it's interesting. I mean, yeah, I like you. I was kind of aware of this change. I think in my mind as a kid, I thought, well, it's the difference between electric lights inside your house, and then you go out and it's sunlight. I mean, there must have been enough people aware of it that Monty Python can do that sketch
That
about
sketch, yeah.
we're surrounded by film, and it's interesting. You're right. It's something that not everyone notices. We've had this recent thing with some TVs and they've got this kind of motion enhancing thing
Oh,
that makes.
yes, this will make me kill again. I went to my brother's a couple of Christmases ago, and we were watching a film, and I didn't know why it looked like Neighbours. It was a
Mm.
movie, and I was going, have they made this? And I didn't, and I actually had to Google it, and then I texted a friend, and they went, "Oh no, it's these new tellies. This is what they're like." And I bought a new telly not that long ago, and the guy who was selling it in John Lewis, he said, "Oh, and look, if you do this, look at," and he was showing Titanic, and he said, "Look, that looks like it was made yesterday." And I went, "I hate that. It doesn't look like a film. I don't want it to look like that. It looks terrible to me." And it's extraordinary. And I mentioned it to my brother and I said, "Your settings have got it on this motion thing, or rather film." And he said, "I don't." He said, "I don't know what you're talking about." So does that not look different to you than if it looked like film? And he didn't know what I was talking about. And a lot of them default to it now as well, which is why I
it.
feel increasingly too old for this world, Gareth.
Well, that's exactly kind of what happened to me. We bought a TV recently and we've been watching The X-Files, which is, of course, has
Ah,
this marvelous filmic look
yeah.
to it, except when when I looked at it on this TV, and like you say, suddenly we're in daytime soap.
Yeah, look, yeah,
And
that's exactly it. It looks like The Bold and the Beautiful, or one of those, one of those terrible daytimes. It makes things look worse. I don't know why people want it. It's
it's
extraordinary.
I've heard it's really meant for sport. I'm gonna say there are spoilers for this,
Oh
so
yes,
I can talk about the. I think it's quite effective. The final, as it's the money shot at the
yes.
end. I think that works.
Beautiful. There is a wonderful legacy in science fiction. There's of arresting shots being done very simply, often by I'm a Quatermass guy, Gareth. The monster in the Quatermass experiment was Nigel Neal's hands in latex gloves. Well, the movement on Mars is, I think, Christopher Miles's fingers, isn't it?
Hmm.
On a model, and instead of showing a monster, it's, as always, your imagination does the work, and the fact that it's on this faux realistic footage, you do entertain the idea. Oh, is it? They haven't shown us the monster. Actually, what they've done is they've found some footage of it in a vault somewhere, or we've had access to this. So it's the clandestine nature of it. It's like a snapshot of Bigfoot, isn't it? It's like that picture of the abominable snowman's foot. It's all in the great tradition of those things. That picture of the Loch Ness monster. It's not just that it's the thing. It's the medium that it's captured on that itself has been withheld or is murky or is whatever. So it adds another layer of mystery and intrigue to it. And it's brilliant because it makes your imagination sort of fill in the blanks, and probably, fill the blanks with worse things than you could ever depict. So it's simple, but simple doesn't mean easy. What it means is they came up with a simple solution to do something, extremely effectively. And I think it's great because it's very, very subtle, and I'm sure you and I imagine very different things shifting that sand, and that's the
Mm.
beauty. Everyone will have their own reaction to it, and I think it's a great ending.
I do. I think it's absolutely. It's like you say. It's absolutely. It's the right choice. It's the restraint that sort of makes it. Because interestingly, the director said initially he was looking in through Anglia's large nature film documentary footage, and he was thinking he'd find presumably some sort of spiny undersea creature or something like that.
Yeah,
And but he said that nothing really worked, and I'm so glad he saw that.
absolutely. Me too. It wouldn't have been anything like as effective. So the little bit of trouble they went to build a bit of a model, and
it's taken on a life of its own, and it's become sort of part of UFO mythology, sort of
yeah,
along, and particularly the idea that there's a whole lot of technology that the government or the world government has that we don't know about, and we're
yeah.
just seeing this. What do I mean, the idea of sort of like what it is about these conspiracies that grips people's minds.
Yeah, well, I think so. I mean, I think I think we as human beings know that we don't know everything,
Mm.
and it being a conspiracy helps us curiously to have agency within that, because it's not that we don't know everything because we haven't found it out, we haven't been proactive enough, we're our knowledge is not as extensive as perhaps it could be. If it's being deliberately withheld, we are being and people enjoy the idea of it's much better to be a crusader against an injustice than it is to be a sort of passive victim of forces beyond our control. And I don't want to be too pejorative, but I do think conspiracy theories can occasionally be very damaging, and as propagated even more now by the internet. We all have our ways of venting, and of coming to terms with a world that sometimes is unkind to us. And actually, there are probably things that are withheld by governments that we should know about. I'm not denying
Mm.
that. But also, I'm equally quite happy for the government to keep stuff from us, because I don't trust us sometimes with the information that we might be given. I'm now that might, in a conspiracy theorist's mind, have me down as one of the sheep. But also, I know that human nature is such that we do actually need to be contained a little bit in order to have a functioning society. I think unfortunately
Mm.
that's true, and I don't mind. I don't mind. Now, whether we are actually under the control of aliens or the government is up to stuff, I'm more likely to think a government will keep stuff from us in order to make society function more effectively than I do that they're doing it in order to farm us for food or secretly undermine us or whatever. Even though I'm sure a lot of people get into government for nefarious reasons, but I think it's often more mundane as lining your own pockets and helping your own associates rather than anything else. And often I think that old thing of never mistake for malfeasance what you could attribute to incompetence. I think that's a lot of what goes on in the world is down to that. But it's an attractive idea. It's certainly an attractive idea for drama, as you mentioned. The X-Files, that very much hit upon the idea that there are murky corners that an ordinary person. I think that's the appeal of this stuff. It's that the ordinary person alone in their basement at their computer who can see the truth that nobody else can. Well, if you cast yourself in that role, you suddenly you're not alone in your basement poring over your computer. You're a hero. You're the one that can see, and that's why they attribute to the rest of us, the thing about being sheeple and all that sort of thing, because they're the ones with the vision. But then that gets mad when you see. I remember telling a particular friend of mine, saying how much I'd enjoyed the Olympic opening ceremony, which my stepson had taken part in, and he said, yeah, but it's all full of symbolism about the New World Order. And I went, what do you mean? I thought it was just a nice thing. And he cited a few examples of things that were, hidden messages. And I said, but why are they hiding the message? What's the motivation there? If you are these big conspiracy people who are controlling us. Why are you leaving clues that can only be spotted by the angriest men in their cellars? Do you know what I mean? It seems odd, just as a practical modus operandi, set of modus operandi. It seems really odd to go, well, we're going to take over the world and nobody's going to know unless they pick up on the clues that we put in imagery on various things that we disseminate. So that, and then they disappear into the numbers things. And it's like, we've created a set of rules that only we understand, which then I do get a bit cross with them, because you're almost going, which makes us cleverer than everybody else. And they're largely, I'm not sure they are. I think they're angrier and looking for meaning. And that's I get that. And I suppose at the end of the day, it does very little harm. But then I can see that sort of misinformation or that disbelief in the obvious truth is actually causing us harm at the moment. This idea that nobody is telling the truth except for this person who's saying stuff that scientists have said isn't true, and they go, yeah, but even the scientists are compromised, and that's becoming the world we live in now. And that is so it's slightly, the whole conspiracy thing, I think, is slightly more dangerous now than it's ever been, because it's taking hold.
I think I'd agree with you. I think we are there's been unfortunate leveling of fact and fiction in a way that,
unfortunately so, yeah,
that we didn't used to have. I mean, it's interesting that here in Alternative Free, we have this very real problem of global warming. I mean, it was one of the first, ironically.
Yes, which indeed a lot of the modern day conspiracy theorists would deny as a thing, and would say is a thing that's only being used to keep us, stop us doing what we want to do. But yes, it's very, I mean, that's because there are intelligent minds at work, aren't there? Christopher Miles and David Ambrose, have not just done, let's do a glib April Fool. This isn't spaghetti on trees. This is that there are scientific things afoot. It was based in a very real idea, wasn't it? The idea of disappearing people, which is, we know regimes that have got rid of people in order to keep secrets, and especially members of scientific communities and things like that. So that's all stuff you can kind of buy, and is the stuff of good drama. But that then led to let's do it documentary style, because that would be an even more interesting way of handling this, because then there's denotices and embargoes, and documentarians have to dig deep. So that gives us our style, but then what's the wheeze of the documentary, and so then they go, well, let's look at what science could be doing and talking about it. So it's more than just a gag. I think the application of those things is well chosen, is intelligent, and of course, if you apply intelligence, you probably are going to at least hit upon something that might be a concern in the future. So that's a very happy coincidence for the program makers, if not for us.
Indeed. I mean, it's interesting, this idea of the planet is doomed and a small group of people escape in a colony. It's one of those sci-fi tropes that keeps on coming back. I mean, to the point where Douglas Adams can use it as a punchline in Hitchhiker's Guide, with the bee arc.
The bee arc, yes.
Taking a secret colony that gets rid of all the useless people. But I was wondering if there were other particular examples that Alternative Free reminds you of.
Well, I mean, that for example, that idea, Doctor Who has done it with a story called The Ark and a story called The Ark in Space, where the sort of doomed, I love that. And it's a really dramatic moment for something that deliberately sort of tries to eschew too much drama. When Richard Marner says something like, doesn't he? They say, get the hell off this planet before it's too late, sort of thing. And that kind of slaps you in the face a little bit. It's a brilliant moment. But yes, the idea, and it is a variation, isn't it, on the we're drawn to post-apocalyptic dramas, I think, because partially you put yourself in that position and go, and it's horrible. Oh, how would I survive? But also I would be free of the everyday stuff. Tax, bills, work colleagues, all those sorts of things. These dramas allow us to go, but if it did, I kind of like the idea of just having a cottage and making my own jam. And of course, in real life, that collapse would cause all sorts of things and we'd all be totally incapable. But there is a sort of good life element to that. And it's a sort of variation on that. It's a spacefaring variation on that. The idea of sort of almost having a clean slate from all the things that beset us as a society and therefore as individuals. You go, but what if I what if I just had to be a man? You know, that the terrible end might also be a new beginning. And I have to say, I don't think you expect the documentary to go in that direction, because you've got the thing about the missing scientists, so it looks a bit conspiracy, and they do all of that very well. And then you're looking at the science of and then you get the conspiracy goes to different layers, and it goes off in different directions. But I don't think you ever think, oh, this is going to be a thing about the Earth is doomed. We got to get out of here. It seems a bit more domestic than that. So I think, seeing as it's only 56 minutes, is it? They do pack a lot of development in, and it goes beyond just being this is a spoof. The end. They do as much as they can have a developing narrative to it, and I do think that those end bits come as a bit of a surprise.
I'd say so too, and it is fairly new. I was trying to think of any other examples outside of ongoing TV series of films, sci-fi films using that kind of documentary style to tell a story. It's not many.
No, I mean, I've recently revisited the work of Peter Watkins, because he died this year.
That's a good comparison.
And the war game, which I hate to mention, just because it is the one television experience that has caused me the most disquiet in my entire life. I think it's and again, that goes down to things like the film stock that is used, the stark black and white photography, the performance styles in those that are very realistic. So disquieting, but again, that uses the very sort of flat, straightforward documentary to be much more dramatic in a way than actual acting dramatics, bizarrely. So I think it is definitely a great way of telling these sorts of stories. And the X-Files has the X-Cops episode, doesn't it? Which is deliberately seeing our show of the week through the lens of a documentary. But of course, American documentaries are so much more dramatic than ours are anyway, that's not quite the same. And obviously it's a bit more modern.
Any kind of summing up of
well isn't it lovely that there are all these we've got so much rich television history, and I think we often revisit the same things over and over again, and I'm very guilty of that, because I sort of find comfort in stuff that I know. I've just watched Edge of Darkness for the 6th time or whatever, just because it popped up on iPlayer, and I thought I'd have a little look, and then ended up doing the whole thing. The 60s and 70s were such experimental times, and there are so many things that we talk about because somebody's remembered them, and so many that actually slip between the cracks if we're not careful. So it's lovely to have the opportunity to do this, and it's lovely to actually have a look at something that I hadn't seen before, and see so much in it that was and then become aware of the fact that that it had the effect that it had as well. We love that sort of storytelling, don't we? I mean, the old Orson Welles thing, and I know that's a bit more complex and not quite the truth of that is not quite the version that most people casually tell each other. But nonetheless, that idea of a television program convincing people that it's real, or having an impact, or even just annoying people. Do you know what I mean? And the fact that it's lived on. Again, I'm not. As I say, I have this slightly weird relationship with that idea that there are people peddling the aspects of it as if they're true. And I know the program makers felt that as well. But that is a testament to them having done their job very well indeed. And I always am very moved by the idea that anything, as an actor and as a writer, anything that somebody makes, you want people to like it, you wanted to enjoy it. But the idea that people 40, 50 years later can revisit something and it still be worthy of scrutiny, it can still be entertaining in and of itself, and it can still be sort of admired for its ambition and just for the way that it's put together. I think that's extraordinary, because there was loads of things on in 1977 that nobody will ever talk about again. So that in itself, I think, is a testament to some sort of bold ideas and very good execution.
I'm delighted you've enjoyed it. I similarly here. I think it's a brilliant use of a modest budget to tell a very big epic story, and I love the cleverness of it. And the restraint, and just the I don't know if taste is the right word, but just making good choices all the way along in
Yeah.
terms of characters. And it's just the sort of thing, it's one of the reasons I started this podcast, because I wanted to, as well as talk about the big shows that everyone
Yeah.
sci-fi knows, but I love uncovering these kind of little sort of lesser known gems.
Yeah, well, and you've done me a favour in that respect, because I probably wouldn't have given it too much attention if you'd not thrust it in my direction. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Before we go, I'd like to talk about another expansive and epic subject, which is Toby Haydock and
Oh God.
your many things that you are doing. Is there what's coming up in your
I'm working on my second book about Nigel Neal's Quatermass
Mhm.
serials. So my book on Quatermass 2, which will also cover 1984 and The Creature, the other productions that Nigel Neal and Rudolph Cartier did in the 1950s, which will be a follow-up to the book I had come out this year that I'm very proud of, about the Quatermass experiment, which is the result of about 30 odd years of research and occasions where it looked like it was never going to happen. So that came out and is still available. So I'm working on the second one, which will hopefully be out by this time next year. I'm currently I've interrupted to do this, writing my end of year obituary show, which is going to be in 2 parts on Radio 4 Extra, called Absent Friends. That just started as a little bit of that I did in my continuity for the Seventh Dimension, the Sci-Fi Hour on Radio 4 Extra, where I'd mention a few of the people who'd been important in sci-fi, who died in the past 12 months, and they've eventually, a few years ago, gave me my own program to do at the end of the year. So that was just an example of something where you do something that you want to do, and it sort of gathers momentum. So I've got 2 episodes of that are going out between Christmas and New Year, where I'm just saluting actors and writers and people who've made nice sci-fi who've died over the past 12 months. And I keep podcasting. I do a Doctor Who podcast which is called Toby Haydock's Time Travels, and there's various iterations of that. So I keep creating stuff and flinging it out there, and it's usually to do with science fiction or old things. And also, I'm a stand-up comic, and I have a show in Manchester every Tuesday night. So I have this weird mosaic. I'm always having to generate my own work. I always seem to have had to, whilst then doing acting and voiceovers and all the other bits of bobs that very few people can survive just doing those things. So I have this, and my hobby has become my part of my living. So I'm also currently making a documentary about a Doctor Who story for the next BBC Blu-ray that's going to come out next year. So that sort of stuff keeps me ticking over as well. So it's a weird juggling act and mosaic. It means I never get bored, because if I'm bored of the one thing I'm doing, I can leave it for a day and go and do 2 of the other things that are now, because I also leave everything to the last minute.
The book is marvelous. On the
Oh,
Quatermass
thanks.
experiment. That's
Yeah,
a
I'm
great
really
piece.
proud of it. It was I put a lot of work into that, and the book I'd originally thought about 36 years ago was nothing like the one that's come out, because obviously I got loftier ambitions, and I think if I'd done it 36 years ago, it would have just been a list of the characters of Quatermass and the top 10 lines or whatever. This has really delved into the history. I've gone through all sorts of archives. I've also had access to material that nobody else has had. The photos hadn't even been developed. The photos that are in it,
Wow.
nobody had seen those. Nobody knew they existed until they came out in the book. But also, I wrote to a lot of those actors while they were still alive. They're all dead now, so I've got letters and interviews and tape recordings of now long dead actors, but who contributed to those programs. So it's not just been going through archives and looking at scripts. It was also first-hand recollections, and I've got unprecedented access into Nigel Neal's stuff, because the family, I think Judith Kerr was very, very kind to me, because she came to the recording of an adaptation I did of Nigel Neal's The Road, which is being repeated on the 28th of December on Radio 4 Extra, with which I adapted. It stars Mark Gatiss and Adrian Scarborough and Hattie Morahan, whose dad, Christopher Morahan, directed the original. If you don't know Nigel Neal's The Road, avail yourself of it. Don't look it up. If you don't know it, don't look it up, because the ending is best to come to fresh. So don't even look on Wikipedia. It gives away the ending. But the Road will be on Radio 4 Extra on the 28th, I think, of December, that weekend between Christmas and New Year. And Judith came to that and was really happy with what I'd done with it. So then I went and visited her at home. And then when she died, I was in touch with the family and I helped them out with a couple of things. And so then when they were gathering, what remained of Nigel Neal's archive, they very kindly have let me have it, and they've kindly let me use things like photographs and documents and things, because they know that I'm an admiring curator of this stuff, and that sort of stuff just makes putting a book like this together so much more helpful and useful, and it means that book maybe should have been written 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago. The fact that it took until now to do it means that it's actually a better book than it would have been 5, 10, 15 years ago. So if you're vaguely interested in TV sci-fi and or Quatermass, I'm not just saying it because I wrote it. I know how much blood, sweat and tears went into it, and that everything has been checked and double checked and cross-referenced, and I think nicely put together.
Yes, definitely recommend the Quatermass Experiment, Toby's Quatermass Experiment book. It is absolutely superb. I mean, I'm someone who Quatermass has been part of my life since I saw my parents had the Penguin script books.
Oh, yes.
So I remember when I was a kid just looking at those black and white photographs that were in the middle, and that it sort of started from there. So it's something that shaped me over the years, Quatermass, and it's great that it's in your hands. That the material is in your hands. And,
I feel very fortunate. Yeah,
and I did enjoy The Road as well. I listened to it the first time when it was broadcast.
Well, that took some getting off the ground. That was turned down the first time, and I only submitted it again because a producer had said, "Have you got any ideas for the next commissioning round?" And I had 4, and the A4 piece of paper looked like it had space for another one at the bottom, and I didn't want it to look one. So I just basically cut and pasted from the pitch for The Road that I'd done. I thought, well, they'll just reject that one, but the chances are if I send in 5, they'll find reasons to reject 4. That'll improve my odds than if I send 4. Do you know what I mean? Because they and actually they accepted 2 of those ideas. One of them was The Road, and I was developing both of them and thought, well, they'll probably, The Road's going to be too hard. The rights are going to be hard. It's not going to happen. And actually, eventually, it was the other one that fell by the wayside, and The Road got made. And I never believe, even when they said it's gone through to the next round, or we've got this, we're able to do that, I never thought it would happen. And it's another one of those ones that just a bit of perseverance and a few surprises, and there it was. And again, I'm so pleased that because the play deserves to exist. I couldn't make a TV version or a film version. I don't have those resources. Mm-hmm. I did have a radio producer who wanted to work with me, who liked the idea, and so we've at least got a version of the play that's pretty faithful to Neal's version. I had to do some things to it for audio, and particularly the ending I had to be quite inventive with, because it didn't have what the TV version has, which is the visuals. But we did actually use some of the original sound effects from the TV version, because that's all that survives. So Mark Ayres had a sound tape, or was it? Mark Ayres sent me the sound tape, which was all that survived from it. So I said, wouldn't it be fun if we actually incorporated some of that into our ending, and we did. So the original is there, sort of echoing through time, which is very appropriate.
Oh, that's great. So thank you so much for taking some time out of your busy life to be on this podcast.
Thanks for asking me, Gareth. It's been a great pleasure.
Thank you very much. I'll wish you the best for the future. Thank you very much, and thank you very much wherever you are listening to this. I hope we'll all get together again soon. So goodbye for now. Alternative 3 was released on DVD in 2007 by Second Sight. It can be bought online from Amazon Prime Video. A novelisation of the film in the style of a non-fiction book was written by Leslie Watkins and published in 1978. Retitled Alternative 003 in the USA, it was promoted as non-fiction alongside other paranormal books. It was republished in an expanded form in 2016. A novel entitled Alternative Free by Ken Mitchell features the same concept but is not officially related. Very British Futures is hosted and produced by Gareth Preston with guest Toby Haydock. Music by Chattery Art. If you could take a moment to rate us on your podcast app, that would be much appreciated. Or share our links on social media. You can get in touch with the podcast via verybritishfuturespodcast@gmail.com. Follow us on X at FuturesVery, or visit our website westlakefilms.uk/verybritishfutures. This has been a Phantom Frame production.